somewhere along the way, I became a member of Phi Delta Kappa, and three of us, Allan Miller, Bill Claflin, and I, devoted a Saturday to a district conference in Salina. And we were asked to come up for a project for our campus. We got started, I said, in this bare room with one light bulb, why don't we bring a stone schoolhouse to campus? And that's when Allan Miller said, why not? And Bill Claflin was fine with it.
In a way, I thought it was going to be kind of a joke, and I didn't think it could be done.
I was involved with the first fundraising. Then that was a flight to New York, where the PDK was having their 2-year meeting. So I went to collect that first money to fund this school.
My recollection is that that was a $2,500 grant that she got, which was pretty formidable at that time to do something like that. With a preliminary grant of $2,500, we had Dave Adams, who was a great journalist in the journalism department here, and he was a Phi Delta Kappa member. And he said, well, I'll write a news story about it. And I think his headline was, Wanted, Dead or Alive, an Old Stone Schoolhouse. I'm maybe making that up a little bit, but it was a solicitation. Do you know of a one-room school that would be worthy of a place on the Fort Hays State University campus? Over 30 schools were identified. So we had a committee formed. We narrowed it to 10 schools. And then the people down around Dorrance and Wilson really started a kind of a campaign for the Plymouth School.
I remember going over to this field in eastern Russell County and seeing this sort of a wreck of a schoolhouse, broken windows, so the elements could get inside, the rain, the snow, the frost, and so forth. But wheat happened to be a good price in those days, and the farmer wanted it gone. Merle Walker, who succeeded George Sternberg here, the museum fellow, he verified that the stone was the best limestone, and he really favored Plymouth School. So there we were to catch this little stone house that could be saved. And that's how Plymouth was chosen.
Where is it going to be placed? That was a big question. And the other big question was, who's going to pay for it? And then the third is an auxiliary of that. How are we going to keep it up and do the maintenance on it forever and ever, amen? And those were legitimate questions.
There wasn't smooth sailing all the way, because there were certain powers that be that did not want to see that school here. There was some resistance at people who had the administrative authority to reject it. It maybe delayed us a little bit, but the president was for it, and he was overruled. As
luck would have it, the guy who was most opposed to it, the buildings and grounds person, he decided to retire. And in his place came Brian Murray. Started talking to Brian right away about the problems we were having. And Brian said, God, it sounds like a great project. We need to do this. And we talked about where to have it placed. And he said, well, it seems like there were some notes that it was suggested to place it right on the highway. He said, is that where you want it? And he looked real puzzled to me. I said, well, not especially. It's also been proposed that we put it on the banks of Big Creek. Brian said, yeah, he thought that would be a better place to put it. And then we had to try to figure out, how do we deconstruct it? Luckily, the past president, Gustad's daughter, Ann Gustad, quit her job as a National Park Service ranger, came back to Fort Hays State to do her master's degree. She mentioned that, well, she can get the Park Service instructions for how they do restoration of stone houses, buildings, the Rockefellers in Acadia National Park and all of that. And so we used the National Park Service instructions of how you mark the stones. Those stones were on the ground for over a year before we could load them on the truck and bring them to the campus. Then we really didn't have any money. No one had an idea of where to get this money. The Topeka Public Library decided that they were going to make public all of the tax returns for nonprofit groups that gave money away in grant form or as donations, contributions, or whatever in the state of Kansas, and that they were providing all of the libraries, including Forsyth Library, with this book. And two of my students at that time, Terry and Janet Boren, a man and wife, came to me and said, you know, for our Ed Research Master's project, we'd like to do a joint project. And I said, well, I don't think we've ever had anyone do a joint project, but you know, I've got an idea to go through this book and see if any of them do educational things or building project things or whatever. They came back to me then and they said, you won't believe this. The CEO of the Garvey Foundation was my Sunday school teacher in Wichita. I said, you're kidding. I made a decision. Terry Boren and I would go down, and he kind of got interested in it, I thought. And then he said, well, I don't know if the board will approve this or not because we've never really done a restoration thing quite like this. And a month went by, and I thought, well, we're probably going to have to look for something else. And I got a phone call from the Garvey Foundation, and he said, Allan, I'm looking on my desk at a check for $20,000. Are you kidding, for the Stone Schoolhouse restoration? He said, yes, we want to do it. So that's how we got the major part of the money.
So we were underway, and that just about did it. We had tremendous volunteer labor.
Then the next problem we had, as we had torn down the school, it was double layered, and the inner stones were just like thrown together, pieces no bigger than a pebble, and they just crumbled. David Van Doren, who's quite a brilliant innovator of construction things, I was telling him of the problem that we had, and he said, got a cure for that. My wafflecrete that we're just starting out with, we could do the interior wall that the stuff will hold up forever. And he said, I'll charge you just for the materials. And it was, I believe, $5,000. So then I knew we had enough to go on.
I was on my hands and knees nailing roof timbers into pallets so that the stones that other people numbered could be loaded onto a truck and then driven here to Ellis County and the campus.
We got enough pallets, got all the stone onto pallets, and then how do we get them to campus? And Dave Van Doren said, well, I'll donate the truck and the driver. And Vic Dobrava, Loretta Dobrava, who wrote the history of the Plymouth School to try to get us to take the school in the first place, her husband was a great farmer, and he had a hay rack type of thing on his tractor, and he said, shoot, I can go in there. He said, my rack will go right under those pallets. We'll just put them right onto we'll load them right onto his truck. And you'll have to figure out how to get them off of the truck. And Buildings and Grounds, when we got here, unloaded all of them. So there we solved that problem. I think that Dave Van Doren was the one who identified Mike Gnad and said he's probably the only stonemasoner around here who you'd want working on that project. And then he said he would come and do it, and he did it for a reduced fee. And he was great. And he did it much faster than I ever imagined that he could get it done. Every time we turned around, there was some kind of roadblock in our way, and every time we turned around, from unexpected places, the problems got solved. I don't know how we did it. I have no idea how we really got this thing completed, and it turned out wonderfully well. But of course, I'm standing there at the first dedication, and we had this wonderful program that Robert Lewers kind of wrote, and he was our first master of ceremonies. And we had all these one-room school teachers, as many as we could find from interviews we'd been doing with some of them. They came and they were honored, and one of them came up and thumped me on the chest and said, "Where are the books?" And I said, "I have no idea, ma'am." But Phi Delta Kappa gave us some more money to do a search for the books. One principal from, I don't know if Grand County had just passed away. Patterson was his name. And his wife had all of these books that he'd been collecting from one-room schools in the basement. And she gave the books in his name.
I think it's inspirational to know that some of our ancestors thought so highly of education that they built a school for their children before they built homes for themselves. And winters here can be ferocious. It's just took a lot of hard work and to come to this strange country and to make a life for themselves. But they did know that they wanted their children to have better lives. Their route to a better future was through education. So I think that's part of the heritage of Plymouth School.